Maximize cloud efficiency with Doit, the trusted partner in multi-cloud management for thousands of companies worldwide. Visit doit.com. That's DOIT.com. Doit, your cloud simplified.
So this year we are actually celebrating a 10-year anniversary of Kubernetes, and that's been quite a journey. And at the same time, we think that this is a great opportunity to reflect a little bit on the journey that Kubernetes has had throughout the last 10 years and kind of talk a little bit about what the future brings for Kubernetes, for platform engineering, and for the cloud native space as a whole. And that's what we are going to discuss in today's episode of Kubernetes Unpacked podcast. My name is Kristina Devochko.
I'm Michael Levan.
And here we are. So let's kick it off. So 10 years, that's quite an impressive journey Kubernetes has had in terms of its adoption and how broad it got adopted in the tech industry. There are not that many services that have been adopted so hugely on that scale as Kubernetes did. So what do you think about that, Michael? Do you think any other tech got as viral as Kubernetes did?
No, I mean, the only thing that I can think of is overall VMware, ESXi, and that level of virtualization. Hyper-V, I mean, we saw some adoption, but it's not like we saw, Hyper-V having its own conferences, right? Versus VMware having its own conferences. And just out of morbid curiosity, so let's see, ESXi initial release date, 2001, 23 years ago. By the time it was actually adopted, right, we're probably looking at 2005 to 2006. Because remember, there was a long time in there where everybody thought the same way as everything else. There were a lot of engineers that said, this whole virtualization thing is going to be for your lab environments only. It's never going to hit production. And we've heard that every new iteration of technology. So if we think about it, VMware maybe from 2005 to 2016, 2015, 2016 was the thing, right? Got about a 10-year run out of it, more or less. But I would say, during those last couple of years, it was still, of course, very popular because that was the only solution. Books were still being written, conferences were still going on, etc. But it wasn't the focal point, right? Because by that time, VMware had things like NSX and had other platforms and products that were very popular as well in the VMware landscape. So ESXi at some point, kind of took a step back. And for everybody listening that's not familiar with ESXi, ESXi is VMware's virtualization platform, right? So if a data center is running virtualization, which 99.99999% of them are, 99.99999% of that virtualization is going to be ESXi, at least right now, until we see more and more people pulling off of ESXi because the price changes with the Broadcom acquisition and all that fun stuff. But overall, I would say, and then even before that, right? So the other biggest thing, the cloud, maybe, because if we think about it, 2015, 2016 was when cloud technologies were really popping off. And it's 2024. And, cloud was really popular and really the thing for what? 4 years, maybe 4 or 5 years. And then it kind of just started to trickle in the background, right? And we know it's there, but it's not as hypey and buzzy as it used to be. So arguably, yeah, I mean, I think you're 100% right. Kubernetes has been the most trendy underlying platform, viral. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Platform that we've kind of ever seen in terms of length of time, because Kubernetes is still going strong. There's a lot of content and there's a lot of books and there's a lot of this and there's a lot of that. And the Kubernetes project is more or less stable. But yeah, it's been the most trendy, I would say.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's quite impressive, also standing the challenge of time as an open source project as well. This is also a big challenge for the project for an open source project that can be adopted a lot and becoming popular and with an active community of contributors, and then kind of getting stale over time and stop being maintained over the course of years. So I think quite many open source projects have experienced that throughout the time. And it's always good to see projects that really stand and get such a huge community of contributors that keep the level of activity high, and that high with all the release frequencies that Kubernetes has. And that requires a lot of time and effort from quite many individuals. So I think that is pretty impressive.
Yeah, 100%. I actually have a question for you regarding that, and I'm sure a lot of other people are maybe thinking the same thing. When it comes to these open source projects, Kubernetes being one of them, right? Kubernetes is arguably the biggest open source project. When we're thinking about the future of Kubernetes, do we think that its future could change based on like an enterprise grade feel? And what I mean by that is there was a time in tech where there was not a lot of open source. I mean, well, no, actually, I'm lying. Linux is obviously the biggest open source software, but there was a time in tech where open source was there, but it wasn't like a thing. You know what I mean? Like at jobs and in enterprise environments and stuff, it wasn't used, like in production really. The things that were used in production were like, the enterprise grade software, aka the stuff that you paid for and you had support for. But then there was a bunch of venture capitalist money that came out. And before we knew it, open source just blew up. Like open source became trendy, right? Like open source came from, developers sitting in their basement, to being like a popular fad kind of, which is probably a problem within itself. But anyways, and then it became this thing where like now you look at enterprises and the majority of what they're running is open source, not enterprise grade, right? But now we're kind of almost seeing this pattern revert with open source projects getting bought, with open source projects, I don't want to say failing, because I don't think failing is the right word, but
changing licensing models.
Changing licensing models and not withstanding the brunt of what's occurring in the community because they're not as popular. There's not a lot of venture capitalist money going out to these open source projects anymore. That kind of had its time and it took its course. So now I'm kind of curious, like, number one, will we get back to the point where in the enterprise and in production, we see more of that enterprise grade, aka paid software? Or will we still continue to see open source? And regardless of what that answer is, like, what does that mean for something like Kubernetes moving forward? Like, does Kubernetes get, I don't want to say closed, but like, does it become more enterprise? I mean, or maybe it already is, right? Like, if we think about the managed Kubernetes services and we think about the various offerings available for Kubernetes, maybe it already has kind of hit that enterprise level.
I mean, that is a really like somewhat philosophical question, maybe even,
Right.
but we could go on for hours discussing this because there are so many details here. And to answer the first question, I really hope not that we are not going to see the situation where we get back to closed source projects. I really hope that this will not happen. And I think like my gut says that this will not happen. But there is a big challenge here that an industry needs to address as a whole, and that is the way we are using open source projects, because we need to remember how open source development actually works. It is happening based on the volunteer, often free, non-paid effort of individual people. And we need to remember that people also they can get burned out if you are not getting credited or inspired or motivated for the work that you are doing. It feels very lonely trying to maintain that project over time when other companies and enterprises create projects on top of that, get money for that, and you're not getting any terms and any way of crediting for that work. And I think that is also a big challenge, how enterprises are treating open source projects. We see that many enterprises just take it without actually giving anything back. And with Kubernetes, I don't see it like being an issue because there is such a big diversity of enterprises that are contributing to the Kubernetes project, and also individual open source developers contributing to that project. And what also helps for the Kubernetes and other projects in the CNCF landscape is basically the governance model of CNCF. So there is some support that you get to ensure that the project lives on as long as possible. But if you have a project that only has a single enterprise that has employees that have created it initially and have been maintaining it initially, and then this enterprise is being acquired or goes bankrupt, and then you have actually no one else other than that enterprise who has been developing and maintaining that open source project, then I think you're in a very bad situation. And I think ensuring the diversity of contributors of a project that actually is being adopted is also a factor to ensure that situations like we've seen with some of the projects being acquired and changing licensing models, that this will not happen. So like to answer your question, I believe that we will not go back to the closed source projects, but in the industry, we need to have a better way to handle open source development, with more enterprises investing into giving their developers, their engineers, time and capacity to do open source development as part of their work, or sponsor the products, the open source projects that are being developed by others, ensuring that the project has the funds to continue the way it is. Right. And also having like more support from organizations like CNCF and Linux Foundation and all that. So that is what I believe is important, because a lot of innovation and great things happen through open source. Mm-hmm. We can't just let it, die. Right. I think it will affect the industry and as a whole. That's why we need to take a stand here. But what are your reflections on that? What do you think?
Ironically enough, for whatever reason, my head is going more to the business side, which it usually doesn't. Every once in a while, I think about the business side, but usually doesn't. But here's the thing that engineers, even myself, right? Like I don't think about all the time, and maybe I should think about it more. These are open source projects. These are open source projects with people that have salaries and have a company to run and have maybe a mortgage or rent and lives and whatever. Point being is this, regardless of like how much we hate to think about it and admit it, these open source projects, they got to be able to sell something to survive. They got to sell their software, right? Or they got to sell support, or they got to whatever it is, right? If you're running a company, you have to have the ability to make it profitable in some way, shape, or form, right? Otherwise, not only are you not getting paid, but everybody else isn't getting paid. And here's the problem. Because there's so much open source, and because there are so many projects, and because there are thousands of tools at this point, some of which do a lot of what the others do. Because of this, it's really hard to keep that project going unless it's an open source project under Microsoft, right? So I'm thinking Radius, for example, or if it's an open source project, maybe not under a particular company, but maintained by a particular company, right? So in that case, I'm thinking Carpenter. AWS primarily maintains it. So things like that, like if you're a big company and you're maintaining open source, yes, I think that there is some future aspect. But with all of these, whatever you want to call them, these side companies, right, where that open source project is the company, I think moving forward, because of all the not because these projects aren't good, because all of them are good in their way, and all of them are usable and will make your life easier in their way. But I think because of the vast amount of projects right now, it's going to be really, really, really hard to just continue maintaining them purely from a financial perspective. And luckily, Kubernetes doesn't have this problem, right? Because we got everybody working on this thing. Microsoft, AWS, Google, Red Hat, everybody's working on this. I don't think Kubernetes is going to have that problem.
Maybe that's the thing, because again, what you mentioned kind of also goes into the diversity. If all your business strategy is to create an open source project and that will be the only thing, and you can provide, for example, some enterprise support or some kind of an enterprise enhancement of that open source project, that's quite risky, especially for a small company. And
Right.
maybe that is the challenge that companies need to really think about, what kind of business model they would like to have and what kind of services and products they would like to offer, truly understanding what open source means. And maybe a better option would be like creating something as open source, but also having other products, or a really having like a core that could be open source and then building much more additional functionality on top of that as an enterprise, and maybe ensuring that the project gets more companies to contribute to it so that you're not the only one. A combination of these things would probably help to maintain open source projects that really are valuable and being adopted in the industry, because this has really created a lot of fear, I think. Like in many enterprises now, what are we gonna do, and how trying to reinvent the wheel in every single enterprise now to, instead of utilizing the same open source project, would not be something we would like to go back to. But as you said, I don't think Kubernetes will face this problem, to be honest.
Let's take a quick sponsor break. Maximize cloud efficiency with Doit, the trusted partner in multi-cloud management for thousands of companies worldwide. Doit's innovative tools, expert insights, and smart technology make optimization simple. Elevate your cloud strategy and simplify your cloud spend. Visit doit.com. That's DOIT.com. Doit, your cloud simplified. And now back to the show.
Yeah, like you said, you brought up a really good point. It's kind of all about the business model, right? Like one company that sticks out to me, I think they're still doing good. They raised a round recently and they're doing solid, I think, is Solo. They have that software where they like help you maintain Istio.
Yeah.
Like something like that, right? Really, really good. They're not all open source, but their open source model is actually quite good because they're taking something that's hard, that's open source, that's difficult to manage, and giving you an easier way to manage it as long as you pay them a couple bucks. So something like that, they're actually creating their open source off of somebody else's open source, and you're paying them for convenience and for help with that open source. So that's just like an example of like a business model, I think, in the open source space that actually helps. So I think Kubernetes is safe. I think open source in general is going to see some changes. I think platform engineering is, like we've talked about a ton. We've been doing it for a long time. It just finally has a name now, which is cool. Yeah.
Put a name on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it has also taken off. Like, it's mainly since the last year we're talking a lot about it. So can we look on a more positive note from something a little bit philosophical and more into like the future? I think one of the earlier episodes we have also been talking like about Kubernetes, the core Kubernetes project, if it has become like boring and it's not being actively developed. So what is like the future? And there I remember we were talking about all the different plugins and enhancements that can come more out of the box for engineers to utilize and enhance the way they operate workloads on Kubernetes, and that actually a stable core is good. So like if we look now into the future with platform engineering and Kubernetes, and you have also like written a book on the platform engineering, so like, what do you think the focus will be in the next 10 years from now on? Like, what do you think will come for the Kubernetes ecosystem and, yeah, in the platform engineering? Do you have any predictions your gut is telling you?
So number one, I think Kubernetes is going to evolve more into being an API that you interact with versus an underlying system that you interact with. So right now, unless you're using something like Autopilot or EKS with Fargate profiles, you're still managing that underlying server and system. I think that Kubernetes is going to kind of go like serverless in a sense, where you'll be managing more of the platform at the software level versus at the hardware level. The hardware level will still need to be managed. Like, I'm not saying that hardware is going away. You're still going to have to manage CIDR ranges and firewall rules and
Mm.
memory and CPU and all that. Like, that's never going away. We've learned that over the past, 60 years. But I think the focus is going to be less on like scaling out and controlling the cluster and more about maintaining those underlying resources, but also maintaining the platform on top of Kubernetes. So I think Kubernetes as a whole, at least the model of the API and how the APIs work, that's going to be still the underlying platform of choice. And then you're just going to build on top of it. So, you're going to run your VMs, you're going to do stuff like, utilizing Crossplane to create resources outside of Kubernetes. You're going to utilize, things like Kubeflow to manage data models and stuff within your cluster. You're going to do things like manage your containers still. So I think Kubernetes and platform engineering, that's why they go so well together, because at some point the underlying layers of Kubernetes will kind of drift away. We'll think about it more from a software level. And we're going to be utilizing platform engineering practices to build on top of that new foundation.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And that kind of correlates with the whole Kubernetes is hard and reducing the cognitive load on engineers focus that we've had in the industry recently. And I think it will continue to be a focus as well with such a large landscape with hundreds of tools to choose from. And I do also think that like having opportunities to, I'm not sure if I want to use the word abstract, but maybe like have something built on top of Kubernetes where the management and the operational side of Kubernetes is taken as much as possible by something, and you need to like do less and focus more on building the value. So for developers, it would be building the value in the applications themselves that are running on that platform on top of Kubernetes. And for platform engineers or Kubernetes administrators, however you call it, it would be more about ensuring that that interaction between developers and other end users and kind of the platform is seamless and user-friendly and pluggable and has all the necessary capabilities that developers and the company would need to ensure that they can scale, that they can efficiently deliver new functionality into their applications, and those are efficient and performant and basically do what they should and bring value to the society.
Yeah, I think the future of Kubernetes and platform engineering is going to be interesting because it's going to be a mindset shift, but at the same time, it'll be just like we remember it.
Yeah, so the future is bright, with other words. Yeah.
There are unicorns and bright skies and pink rain and all that stuff that makes us happy.
No. Challenges make engineers happy. We can't
Exactly.
say that it's gonna be just unicorns and sunshine and all. Come on, we'll get bored. What's the next new challenge? Here's a question for you. What's the next big thing? I don't know if you've seen that, but some folks were like stating, okay, Kubernetes, we heard it. What's the next big thing? Do you think there is like the need for the next big thing in the industry? Like now it's kind of AI, but
we're talking about like underlying system level.
Good question. I don't know, like the next big challenge to solve, maybe.
I think I know of the next big challenge. It's probably not a popular answer. People might not like it, but I'm still happy to say it anyways.
Up to you.
I think the next big challenge is going to make engineers again. I think that for the past 5 to 6 years or so, we've been fed a lot of markety hype and a lot of, we're going to do this and it's going to make your life easier, or you don't have to work hard because of this, or this is going to be easy because of that. And we've learned the hard way several times over the past couple of years that there is no easy route and there is no easy way, and you still have to put your engineering hat on to solve problems. So I think the next big challenge is going to be getting engineers back to the idea of actually solving problems versus just watching a talk about how this product is going to make your life 10 times easier. I think we have to get past the world of instant gratification. We have to understand it hasn't worked. Things are still hard. And we have to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. That's going to be the next thing, is like really getting people back to the understanding of this stuff is hard and we need to figure out solutions to make it easy.
And I think that's a very good reflection. I think we need to talk about this things. We need to be honest, and it's not maybe that many that dare to share an honest opinion also these days. So I think it's a good reflection, and I totally agree with you in terms of letting engineers solve real problems. And I would love to see more content out there in the community that is also coming from engineers who have solved a real life problem and challenge and talked about it as transparent as it's possible in a technical way, so that it can help others to not reinvent the wheel, not make the same mistakes, but so that you can search for how others in the industry have solved this problem, and you actually get a real chance to see that type of experience. And personally, I still think that we are lacking in that area, and I would love to see more of that. And there, I think I also have a better work to do from my perspective, but I hope that more engineers also will kind of dare to use some of their effort to share, to write about it, to talk about it in our community forums. So I really hope that will come more of that.
We shall see. Well, anything else that you want to leave everybody with before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think maybe one thing to everyone's listening. In June, CNCF is organizing a bunch of activities related to the 10 years anniversary of Kubernetes. It's called Kubernetes. So like 10 in the middle. So if you search for the Linux Foundation event, Kubernetes Bash Party, you'll see that there will be like a big event on the 6th of June, I think. And there will be also a bunch of local communities, cloud native communities, organizing their own meetups through the first week of June. So you could get an overview there if there is a community around you also organizing an event. So do check it out.
It's Kubernetes?
Yeah, so Kuber, like in Kubernetes, Kuber, and then TEN for 10, and then ES in the end. Search for Kubernetes Bash Party. It should be there.
Oh, okay. Here we go. Got it.
Bash Party, like in Bash scripting language. Kubernetes Birthday Bash. Kubernetes Birthday Bash. So we can probably also add a link to that in the podcast notes.
Yeah, I'm seeing one on June 6th, which is ironic.
That's the big event, yeah.
Yeah, that's ironic. My birthday's June 5th, so maybe I might have to get out
2 days in a row for celebration.
Yeah, that's awesome. Very, very cool. There's one in Salt Lake City I see as well, Utah, St. Louis.
There will be the local meetup in New York, I think, with the New York community group.
Yeah, I'm not seeing anything specific for New York, but there are a bunch of different other things. So
it's still being updated because I think the window is not closed yet for local meetup groups to apply. So just stay tuned, keep an eye on that event page.
Beautiful. Thanks everybody for listening. Really appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed the episode.
Yes, thank you everyone, and thank you for the discussion, Michael.